What is going on, everyone? It is Connor, your host with the most, back with the Week 18 edition of Clutch Crew Sports, heading into Wildcard Weekend. Took the week off last week, was in Colorado watching the Denver Broncos game, but I'm going to be back this week leading into the end of Week 18 and heading into the playoffs. We have the playoff schedule is set. We have the 6 matchups for Super Wildcard Weekend, and basically going to be going over all 6 of the matchups, seeing what each team brings to the table, and giving my official predictions on who I think is going to win each wild card game. So let's get right into that here, going around the shield. So we have, first off, the 2 Saturday matchups. We have the Seattle Seahawks versus the San Francisco 49ers as the 4 o'clock game or 4:30 game, and then the Los Angeles Chargers and the Jacksonville Jaguars as the primetime game that night. So starting with the Seahawks and the Niners, of course, the Niners are the 2 seed in the NFC playoffs. They've been one of the hottest teams in the NFL for quite some time now. Um, they were sitting behind Seattle in the NFC West race to start the year, but towards the end of the year, they finished the year on a 10-game win streak, and they're looking like the best team in the NFC right now. I mean, Brock Purdy has definitely had no problems stepping into the starting role. There was a lot of questions about how good they could possibly be without Jimmy Garoppolo in the lineup. But like I said, Purdy, he's done really well. He's 5-0 now as a starter. And of course, these two teams are very familiar with each other, given that they are division rivals. There are a few division rival games in this Super Wildcard Weekend. There's 3 of them. This is the first of the 3. And the 49ers did win both matchups earlier this season. They took the first game at home in a 27-7 win. That was back when Jimmy Garoppolo took over for Trey Lance. That was the game when Lance started and then got hurt and Garoppolo took over. And then just a few weeks ago, the Niners beat Seattle in Seattle 21-13. Like I said, they've got all these weapons on the team. Christian McCaffrey's having a comeback player of the year type season. They should hopefully be getting Deebo Samuel back for the playoffs. George Kittle's one of the top tight ends in the league. Their defense is second to none. And Purdy really gives this team an extra element because, this team has always kind of been viewed as a team that's been a quarterback away from winning a Super Bowl. And, they almost did win a Super Bowl a couple of years ago with Jimmy Garoppolo losing to the Chiefs there in Super Bowl 55, 54, Super Bowl 54. But Purdy has definitely stepped in, Mr. Irrelevant in the draft. He's stepped in and done a great job. Was actually kind of a late candidate for Rookie of the Year. I don't think he's going to win that, but he definitely made a case for himself there towards the end. The Seahawks, on the other hand, they kind of had an opposite trajectory. They had a really good start to the year, and then towards the end of the season, they really kind of started to fall off. They had Geno Smith, of course, looking like comeback player of the year. He actually set a franchise record for passing yards, surpassing the record that Russell Wilson had set. And this team, it was always basically going to be determined by how well Geno Smith played, was going to be how well they could do, which a lot of people, of course, didn't expect much, myself included. But they've done a really good job. Like I said, Geno, hasn't made really too many mistakes. Kenneth Walker, he's been another candidate for Rookie of the Year. He's really stepped into the starting running back role when, Carson, of course, they had Chris Carson originally, and he was basically going to didn't even play a single game this year with an injury. And then, of course, they had a running back tandem after that where they were going to have, I believe they were going to have Rashad Penny step into the running back role, and then, they were going to kind of do a tandem, but he got hurt as well. They also had DJ Dallas as just kind of like an extra running back, but Walker definitely, he took the reins and stepped into that starting role and did a really good job being the starting running back. Of course, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are still one of the best wide receiver duos in the league. Their defense also hasn't been too bad. The defense, of course, they lost Jamal Adams really early in the year to injury, but, they still haven't been completely terrible. It's still definitely a weak part of this team for sure. In terms of NFC teams, at least, they've given up one of the largest amounts of points allowed. Especially across, I think there's only a few teams in the NFC that are higher than them. Only a +6 point differential on the year. But like I said, definitely a team that's been on a very different trajectory from the 49ers. I said the Niners, they've been on a 10-game win streak. The Seahawks have really been up and down. They closed the year on a 2-game win streak, but they definitely had some not good losses towards the end of the season. They lost to San Francisco and they lost to KC, which, those are two really good teams, but they also lost to Carolina and barely managed to beat the Rams both times when the Rams are basically in the cellar. They lost to the Raiders at home. So the Seahawks really aren't in too much of a position to make any kind of deep playoff run, especially given who they're having to go up against here in the first round. And definitely no doubt in my mind that the San Francisco 49ers are going to be the ones that are going to come out on top here. I do think it'll be a closer game than a lot of people think, just because these are two division rivals, even though San Francisco is clearing away the better team. But I still think San Francisco takes it by at least 10 points. I don't see any way, especially maybe if Seattle was at home somehow, they would maybe be able to find a way to win. But with San Francisco being at home, and of course San Francisco being the hottest team in the league right now, no question that San Francisco should win this game. So then moving on to the Chargers and the Jaguars, of course, Zach and Eric's favorite team, sneaking into the playoffs here in the last week of the season. They definitely made a late season charge to get in. They were looking really bad. I know Zach actually had basically given up on the season early in the year. He thought that the Jaguars, after they had that loss to Houston in week 5, that basically their season was over. But the Jaguars, they got hot at the right time, ended the season on a 5-game winning streak. They managed to really take over the AFC South. Them and the Titans basically went in opposite directions. The Titans were, they were on a really good roll at the start of the year, but then they ended on a losing streak, whereas the Jaguars, they were pretty bad at the start of the year, but they ended the season on a good win streak and were able to get into the playoffs. Avoided a team from the AFC also making it with a losing record, so no losing record teams in the AFC like there is in the NFC. The Jaguars, they've looked a lot better. Trevor Lawrence has really kind of stepped into his own. Doug Peterson's doing a really good job coaching the team. I'm sure there were a lot of people, of course, last year that they knew that the problem in Jacksonville was Urban Meyer. They knew that he was the reason why they were so bad, but, there were still some question marks. Like, okay, how good is Trevor Lawrence actually? There was a lot of kind of questionable moves they made in the offseason. They really overpaid for Christian Kirk in a lot of people's opinions. They gave a lot of money to Evan Ingram. They gave a lot of money to, I think how you pronounce it, Foy Oluokun, the linebacker. They were definitely big spenders, and a lot of people were worried that, they're giving these big contracts to people who aren't really worth it. So, Christian Kirk was making wide receiver 1 money, and he had never been more than just a slot receiver in his career in Arizona. So, but they managed to get it done. They also made a questionable move kind of in the middle of the season, trading James Robinson away to the Jets. That was also a bit questionable, but Travis Etienne's really stepped into that running back 1 role. Him and Trevor Lawrence, of course, were buddies at Clemson, so they have a lot of chemistry together and are able to work together really well. Then Christian Kirk has definitely done a good job stepping into that wide receiver 1 role. The defense as well has also stepped up. The defense, again, still hasn't been the greatest in the world, but the defense has been doing enough to keep them in games, and the offense has more than made up for it in what they've done. Like I said, ending the year on a 5-game winning streak. They had a pretty bad loss to the Lions before they started this win streak, and it kind of looked like it was over for them, but they had that big win on the road against Tennessee and then an even bigger win at home against Dallas, which paved the way for them to get into the playoffs by winning the AFC South, their first playoff appearance since 2017 when they went to the AFC title game against the Patriots. Their opponent here, of course, the Los Angeles Chargers. These two teams actually did meet in the regular season as well. This was the Jags completely destroyed the Chargers. It was 38-10, not even close. Trevor Lawrence threw for 3 touchdowns. James Robinson had 100 yards rushing. Just complete domination by the Jaguars. But the Chargers, another team that have been kind of getting hot at just the right time. They're not kind of this big dominant team that I think a lot of people thought they were going to be, but Justin Herbert's really done a really nice job in his second year. They've really started to get the run game somewhat going. That was kind of their big problem, was the run game was always kind of just a non-factor. But Austin Eckler, he's still one of the best dual threat running backs in the league. And I think the big key for the Chargers is that they're finally starting to get healthy. They've gone through a lot of injuries this year. Keenan Allen and Mike Williams have both been hurt at different times. They've had injuries along the offensive line. Sounds like Rashawn Slater could be set to come back. Probably not for this game, but he could potentially, if they beat the Jaguars, be there for a potential second-round matchup against, or a divisional round matchup against whoever they end up getting matched up against. And like I said, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are healthy now. Joey Bosa is finally starting to get back in the lineup. There was a lot of hype around the pass rushing duo of Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, and now they're finally, Khalil Mack's been playing all year, but Bosa's been hurt since very early in the season. So it's good to see Joey Bosa back and healthy and ready. Still some questions in the secondary. Of course, J.C. Jackson got hurt, but, Derwin James has still played really well at safety. He's still one of the better safeties in the league. And Asante Samuel Jr. has become one of the better young cornerbacks in the league as well. So, this Chargers team, like I said, they haven't really been, getting big dominant wins, but they've won a lot of close games. They've done kind of just enough to win some of these games. They did get some much needed kind of more dominant wins towards the end of the year against the Colts and the Rams. They did drop the Week 18 game to the Broncos that I went to, but they did also kind of just give up towards the end of that game. They once the fourth quarter started, they benched Justin Herbert and put Chase Daniel in at quarterback, and then even towards the end of the game, they maybe had a chance to do something and get the ball back, but they kind of just because they had 2 timeouts left, but they just let Denver kneel on the ball and run out the clock because they didn't really care anymore. So, it's definitely difficult to say like how hard they were trying in that game. Especially against a team like the Broncos, who have not been very good this year, although the Broncos have been looking better the past couple of weeks ever since the firing of Nathaniel Hackett. So, like I said, never good to enter the playoffs on a loss, but like I said, they did kind of give up at the end of that game and didn't really care. So a lot of people could have seen that coming, I guess. But as for official prediction, I know, of course, Eric and Zach are going to be pulling for the Jaguars hard. I know Eric, of course, will be picking Jacksonville. Zach actually is going to continue his trend of picking against the Jaguars because he's picked against them all throughout this 5-game winning streak, and they keep winning. So even though Zach is officially picking the Chargers, I know, of course, he's obviously pulling for the Jags, but I'm going to actually go ahead and pick the Los Angeles Chargers. I just think they're the more complete team right now, especially getting healthy. If this had been kind of the banged-up LA Chargers team that had been playing for most of the year, I probably would have said Jacksonville, but given that this team is finally healthy again, they're definitely playing a lot better. They also ended the year, they were on a 4-game winning streak before that loss to Denver. So, and if I just look at the quarterback matchup as well, I think Justin Herbert's a much better quarterback than Trevor Lawrence. Herbert's been doing it now for 3 years, whereas Lawrence, he had an okay rookie season. He did good this year as well, but Herbert to me is still the better quarterback, and I just like the weapons on this Chargers team better than I like the weapons on the Jaguars. Like if you asked me if I wanted, Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams versus Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Zay Jones, and Christian Kirk, I would take the Chargers players in a heartbeat. So definitely should be one of the best games this first couple of weeks, though, because some of these games are kind of looking like they're going to be blowouts, but this should definitely be one of the closer ones and one of the more entertaining ones to watch. So then moving on to some of the Sunday games, there's 3 Sunday games, of course. This is 2 of them. We have the 1 o'clock matchup between the Miami Dolphins and the Buffalo Bills, the second of 3 divisional games that are happening in the wild card, and then we have the New York Giants against the Minnesota Vikings as the 4:25 game. Starting with the first game, of course, the Bills and the Dolphins. The Bills, of course, had the whole situation going on with Damar Hamlin in that game against the Bengals. They thought they were going to have a chance to get the 1 seed, because they had the tiebreaker over Kansas City. But unfortunately, because of the Hamlin situation and the NFL canceling the game, the Bills did not have the chance to go after the 1 seed. Although, because they beat New England in Week 18, if they end up making the AFC title game against Kansas City, then the game will be played at a neutral site rather than it being played in Kansas City, just to try and compensate for, the unfairness of that situation, because obviously if Buffalo had managed to beat Cincinnati in that game and beat New England last week, they would be the 1 seed instead of Kansas City. So that's the situation with Buffalo there. Miami, of course, they're kind of just really limping into the playoffs. Still sounds like there's going to be no Tua Tagovailoa for this game. They managed to get in on an 11-6 win over the Jets, which also included a little bit of a questionable horse collar penalty on the Jets that led to the Dolphins being able to get into field goal range. I was a little upset about that one, because if the Jets had managed to win that game, then the Steelers would have been in the playoffs instead. But Nonetheless, the Dolphins got in, and they've been one of these AFC teams, along with the Titans, that has just really been in a real tailspin. They dropped 5 of their last 6 games, with their only win being that 11-6 win against the Jets, who had Joe Flacco starting at quarterback. And it's just the offense just looks completely different without Tua Tagovailoa. Because with Tua, this team was looking like one of the best team in the AFC through the first half of the season. Tua was looking like an MVP candidate. Tyreek Hill was looking like he was going to break Calvin Johnson's receiving yards record. Jalen Waddle, of course, like another great receiver. You had a good running back tandem going on with Raheem Mostert and Chase Edmonds, which later became Jeff Wilson. So good there. And also the defense was playing well. But it's just everything is just kind of falling apart. Even before Tua got his second concussion, things were still falling apart. Teddy Bridgewater had to step in for a game, and now Skylar Thompson's been the one who's been starting recently. It looks like Skylar Thompson's going to be the one starting this game against Buffalo as well, because Tua has officially been ruled out, and I haven't heard anything on Teddy Bridgewater. Sounds like he's probably not going to start either. So the Dolphins are going to be going into this game with a third-string quarterback. Of course, on the other side, you have the Buffalo Bills, the number 2 seed in the AFC, 13-win season. The Super Bowl favorites from the start of the year. Josh Allen had another really good season. They've also kind of been hit with injuries, kind of like how the Chargers have, especially on defense. Their offense has remained mostly unscathed. Like I said, you still have, of course, Allen. Devin Singletary has become a reliable running back for them. They're starting to get James Cook more involved. Stephon Diggs is still one of the best receivers in the league. Gabe Davis has become a really good wide receiver too. It's more so just been on the defensive side of the ball with, they lost Micah Hyde early in the season to a season-ending injury. They lost Von Miller a few weeks ago to a season-ending injury. Jordan Poyer's been playing hurt all year, so a lot of injuries happening there. And the secondary really hasn't been playing as good as they had last year. They do have Tre'Davious White back now, but he definitely hasn't looked exactly like himself. He doesn't look like the same all-pro level corner that he was before. But it did take him a long time, so who knows? Maybe this is just like we'll see better from him in the playoffs. But definitely, the front 7 of the team is still really good, even without Von Miller. Gregory Rousseau's become a reliable pass rusher. Ed Oliver's become a really good defensive tackle. And Matt Milano is one of the best linebackers in the NFL right now. So there's a reason why this team, was in the running for the 1 seed. There's a reason why they've won their 3rd straight AFC title crown. There's a reason why they're still considered Super Bowl favorites right now. And no question, especially without Tua Tagovailoa, this Bills team should very easily run over the Dolphins, in my opinion. The Dolphins, they won the Week 3 game against them way back when in Miami, and then the Bills won a close one a few weeks ago as well in Week 15. But without Tua Tagovailoa, I just see no reason why the Bills are not going to win this. And of course, they're obviously still playing with motivation for what happened to Damar Hamlin. So this honestly should be one of the largest margins of victory in these games. This Buffalo Bills over the Miami Dolphins. So then moving on to the 4 o'clock game, the Giants against the Minnesota Vikings. And the Vikings, they're the 3 seed. They're probably just about the worst 13-win team I've ever seen in my life. I thought that, there was kind of a thing between these about 13-win teams a couple of years ago when the Packers were that kind of really bad 13-3 team. But this year it's the Vikings. I mean, it's on paper, this team looks really good. Kirk Cousins is having another good season. Dalvin Cook is still a top running back. Justin Jefferson's the best wide receiver in the NFL right now. And you pair him with, Adam Thielen on the other side, and he's still really good. It's just this Vikings defense is so, so bad. And it's like the offense really can't make up for it most times. I've never seen a season in the NFL where a 13-win team has a negative point differential. They finished the year with a negative 3-point differential. It's one of those things it shows that this team has basically been granted a lot of luck. They've won a lot of very close games, and a lot of their losses have been blowouts. If you look at their 4 losses were a 41-17 blowout against the Packers, a 34-23 kind of semi-blowout against the Lions, a 40-3 blowout by the Cowboys over them. And then, of course, a 24-7 loss to the Eagles in week 2. So, like I said, they've been winning a lot of really close one-score games. They have a lot of games that they won they probably shouldn't have. They probably shouldn't have won that Buffalo game. They probably shouldn't have beaten the which one? They probably shouldn't have beaten the Colts. They needed the largest comeback in NFL history to beat a bottom 5 team in the league. Um, it's just a lot of things going their way. They probably shouldn't have beat the Giants either, and they're playing them again here. Like I said, these two teams did meet 3 weeks ago with the Vikings getting a narrow 27-24 win against the Giants. So it's really going to be interesting to see what Vikings team steps up here because the NFC is very vulnerable. Outside of San Francisco, I could see any one of these teams getting beat by anybody. San Francisco looks like the only real true frontrunner to me right now in the NFC. And the Vikings, they're, in my opinion, they're a fraud of a team. 13-4 is that they probably should be more like 10-7 or 9-8, just given all the luck that they've had and all the how bad the defense is on the team. But they are still here, so you never know what can happen. The Giants on the other side, they definitely had a very surprising start to the year. They were really in the fight for the NFC East for a while there, until they kind of went through a little bit of a rough patch in the middle of the season. But they've definitely, since that loss to the Eagles the first time, they definitely have been able to sort of find their rhythm again. They managed to beat Washington the second time. They blew out the Colts, and then they still lost to the Eagles the second time, but gave them a much better game. And the Eagles, of course, were trying in that game because they were trying to lock up the 1 seed. So it's just the only thing for the Giants, of course, is, Saquon Barkley's had a monster year returning. He's another comeback player of the year candidate. It's just, and the defense has played well enough. It's just, again, the question marks of, Daniel Jones. Like, how much do you trust Daniel Jones? They do have a negative point differential on the year as well. And, part of that is because they've been playing in a really tough division. But, I just don't really know what to expect with Daniel Jones. He's definitely not a quarterback that I can trust. The weapons still aren't that great on this team. Darius Slayton and, Kenny Galladay and Sterling Shepard are definitely not the scariest wide receiver trio in the league. It's really just all through Saquon Barkley. So it's a really tough pick here to analyze the Giants as well. They're another team that I kind of think their record's a bit better than they actually are. Another team that's gotten lucky in a lot of one-score games. So this was probably the hardest game for me to pick just because, conventional wisdom would say, oh, just pick the Vikings. They're the higher seed. They're at home, whatever. But I'm going to go ahead and take the New York Giants to win this game. Like I said, this is going to be another really close game. It could potentially be a boring game just because, I'm not sure what's going to – actually, it could be more exciting. This could be a game that ends in a shootout, whereas like maybe the Chargers and Jags game might be more defensive, or maybe like the Cowboys-Bucks game will be more defensive. This has the potential to be a shootout given, how high-powered these offenses have been, but how bad their defenses have been. So I could easily see this game having like 70 or 80 combined points between the two teams by the end of it. But I'm going to go ahead and take the New York Football Giants, Eric's favorite team, to win. So then moving on to the Sunday night game and the Monday night game, the last two games here. Of course, you have the third divisional game here now with the Baltimore Ravens at the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday Night Football. And this is another one that definitely is shaping up to be a blowout like the Bills and the Dolphins game. It sounds like Lamar Jackson's not going to be coming back for this game. Tyler Huntley's also not been practicing, so it looks like the Ravens are going to have to roll with Anthony Brown at QB, and that's just kind of a recipe for disaster. He did have 280 yards passing in the game against Cincinnati last week, but he did have 2 costly interceptions, which led to good chances for the Bengals. The Bengals, of course, they're another really hot team right now. They're on an 8-game win streak, which, never, of course, didn't get to finish that game against Buffalo, but they were leading before that game got shut down. They just found a way to win. They've also beaten they beat the Ravens last week. They lost to them at home they lost to the Ravens on the road way back in week 5. That was a really close game that went down to the game-winning field goal by Justin Tucker. So, like I said, these are divisional opponents, but if you look at the Bengals, Joe Burrow's having an MVP type season. They still have that really good receiving trio of Chase, Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. Joe Mixon is, he hasn't been as good this year as he was last year, but he's been solid. The offensive line has also gotten better, which is the key. They still don't have a very good offensive line, but this offensive line is better than it was last year, because the O line was really what cost them in the playoffs last year. So it's better this year. The defense is better. The secondary has been playing well, which was kind of the weakness of this team, because their front seven's still pretty good, especially with Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard running after the quarterback. But the secondary has definitely improved as well, and it's what's led them to be on this 8-game win streak. The Ravens, like I said, they're another team that, with the loss of Lamar Jackson, they've definitely been stumbling here in recent weeks. They ended the year on a 2-game losing streak, but they did drop 3 of their last 4. Probably should have also dropped the game against the Steelers in week 14. Yeah, they probably should have dropped the first game to the Steelers as well, but unfortunately for the Steelers, Mitchell Trubisky decided to get involved, and that's why the Steelers lost that game. But, if you look at all of their recent games, I mean, they've just been really struggling to put up offense. Even with Lamar Jackson at quarterback, they've been struggling. He had a really good blazing start to the year, but he really cooled off after the first couple of weeks. Because, I mean, if you look at their last few games, I mean, starting from the Week 11 game against the Panthers, only 13 points in that game, 10 points against the Broncos in Week 13, only 16 against the Steelers, only 3 against the Browns, only 17 against the Falcons, and then only another 13 against the Steelers. So struggling to put up 20 points, and only 16 against Cincinnati in Week 18 as well. So not scoring 20 points is a good recipe for losing in the NFL. The Broncos definitely proved that early in the season. There was some crazy stat that, the Broncos were 3-10, but had they just managed to score 20 points in every game, they would have been 10-3. So scoring under 20 points is never good. And yeah, like I said, this team just doesn't look like the same team, even when they had Lamar Jackson. It's just, the run game's just not as explosive. Teams are really starting to figure out this offense. It's just a very run-heavy offense with, quarterbacks who, outside of Mark Andrews, have no one to throw to, and they're not the best passers in the world either. And the defense also has looked a little bit worse. The front seven for the Ravens is still just as good as ever, but the secondary has looked really weak this year. It doesn't look the same. You would think that with a cornerback tandem of Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey, you'd have a top 5 secondary, but the Ravens have had really atrocious pass defense for most of the year, and that really doesn't bode well when you're going against a team like Cincinnati with, an MVP candidate at quarterback and one of the best wide receiving trios in the league. So no question about it in my mind. Got to go with the home team here, the Cincinnati Bengals. Maybe it'd be a little bit of a tougher decision if Lamar Jackson was playing, but it sounds like he's not going to, so easy choice to go with the Bengals on this one. And then the final game of the playoffs, the Monday night wildcard game between the Dallas Cowboys and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers, of course, the only team in the playoffs this year to finish with a losing record at 8-9, getting blown out by the Falcons in Week 18, although the Buccaneers only played their starters for one quarter of that game. Brady only played the first quarter, and after that it was Blaine Gabbert and Kyle Trask at quarterback. So, it definitely looks bad to have a loss like that to a bad team at the end of the year, but there are other factors at play in that game just because they didn't really play their starters. But the Bucs, they've also just not looked like a good team this year at all. I mean, Brady's been fine, but they're having to rely way too heavily on Tom Brady. They don't have a run game at all. Fournette and White have really not had any run game going. Brady, he set a record for the most completions in a season again this year, but, it's one of those things that, you've got the record for most completions, with 490, but he's also thrown 733 passes, which is just insane. I mean, he's only averaging 6.4 yards a completion. Whereas if you compare that to Patrick Mahomes, who's averaging 9 yards of completion, there's a big difference in when you're just looking at the stats on the face level when you actually get into them. Like, Brady's passing stats this year really aren't super impressive. I mean, 25 touchdowns on 9 picks, only a 52.6 QBR. That's 18th in the league. And like I said, Tampa Bay team has just not looked the same. He seems to have lost some chemistry with Mike Evans. It seems like they kind of found it again in that game against Carolina, but just has that connection hasn't been there like it has been in the past. Chris Godwin's kind of been the main target, but it's really just their whole passing game is so predictable now. It's just a lot of underneath throws. Brady's not throwing the deep ball as much anymore, and it makes it easier for teams to scheme against because they can just keep six guys up on the underneath routes and just watch the slant routes, watch the drag routes. You don't really need to send any safeties or corners back deep because they're not throwing it deep very often. So way too predictable of an offense. The defense has still been decently okay. They definitely are not as good as they have been in the past, like how they were in the year they won the Super Bowl. They do have a minus 45 point differential on the year, which is pretty bad. And then if you look at their opponent, the Dallas Cowboys, which these two teams did play this season in week 1, with the Cowboys getting a 19-3 win. That was also, of course, the game that where Dak Prescott got injured and Cooper Rush had to come into the game after that. The Cowboys, of course, since then, they have been in the fight for the NFC East all year long. They've been trailing Philadelphia all year. They did end the season with a pretty bad loss against Washington. And it was a situation too where, again, it's not like the Cowboys were really resting their starters in this game. They were, Dak Prescott played the majority of the game. And they still lost 26-6 against Washington, which is one of those things like, going into that game, of course, they were still in the fight for the NFC East. If they had won and the Eagles had lost, they would have won the NFC East. But, now after that game, even if the Eagles would have lost, they still would have, not won the NFC East because they had lost as well. And just some not great performances towards the end of the year. They did have that win over the Eagles in Week 16, but that was also with the Eagles having Gardner Minshew at quarterback, and he really kind of torched the Cowboys in that game as well. It's like, if Gardner Minshew is going to torch you, then, how well is Jalen Hurts going to do in a fully healthy offense? They had that overtime loss to the Jags. They barely managed to beat the Texans with a last-second touchdown, and, they're another one of these teams that just kind of remind me of one of these kind of NFC fraud teams like the Vikings, where, like, their record's a lot better than I think they actually are. They've done a lot of beating up on really bad teams this year. They had like a 54-19 win over the Colts. A 49 points against the Bears, stuff like that. They obviously had the big win over the Vikings, but, I kind of try not to put too much in that as well, just because it's the Vikings. So it's one of those things that another team that I don't think is as well. Also, what the Buccaneers have going for them in this game is Tom Brady is 7-0 in his career against the Dallas Cowboys, and they do have a home game here as well. So it's definitely not a gimme at all for the Cowboys here, even though they've got the better record and the better team. But I am still going to go ahead and give it to the Cowboys. I think it's just because they're the better team. I think it'll be a close game. Like I said, it's kind of like 3 games in this, in these wild card games, like 3 games that are probably going to be blowouts and 3 games that should be close. This should be another close one. Like I said, Brady has done really well against the Cowboys in his career, but the Cowboys are definitely hungry, and, they really want to get past this first round of the playoffs, especially after the loss that they had to the Niners last year at home in the first round of the playoffs. So they're really kind of eager to prove and get out of this kind of mold of being like the perennial first round exit team. So going to go ahead and go with the Dallas Cowboys over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But that's going to be it for this episode, guys. Make sure you leave down in the comments below whether you agree with my picks, disagree with my picks. What do you think is going to happen for Super Wildcard Weekend? Who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl? We're finally down to the playoffs. We're finally getting down to the nitty-gritty. Which team do you think has the best chance to win the Super Bowl? Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Getting down to the end of Clutch Crew Sports here. We'll have the final episode of the Lock Board coming out this week to reveal who the winner was. And then after that, there's just a few more episodes before it all comes to an end during the second week of February after the Super Bowl. So thanks, guys, so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.